Welcome to the Cosmic Connection. This is your place to explore the beauty and order of the cosmos.
And your connection to it all.
My name is Amanda Poole-Walsh, and I'm the founder of Astrology Hub.
And I'm Rick Levine, your cosmic navigator.
Now let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cosmic Connection. I am so happy that you've decided to join us here today, and we have a very, very special Cosmic Connection planned. And this has been one of those events that's just organically grown into what it is and what it will be, which is a show that is co-starring. So we have more than Rick Levine today. We also have Tad Mann, who is an epic astrologer. He's an author. He is a legend in the field. And these two are really good friends as well. And they go way back. So having them together today to talk about the December forecast is just such a treat for us all. So welcome to both of you. I'm so happy that you're here.
I'm happy to be here with a legend.
So am I, Rick.
I thought you had to die before you became a legend.
No,
Hey,
living legend.
Ted, do you remember where we met?
No, I don't.
Well, Amanda, you might be interested in knowing that Jeff Jower, who was my astrology buddy and partner, now flying in the ethers, looking at the show, laughing at us. That Jeff actually was a really good friend of Tad's before I was, and it was really through Jeff that I met Tad, and it was at the University of Michigan at one of Ray Merriman's conferences, way in the Wayback Machine, probably in the late 80s is my guess.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Well, we are so lucky to not only be able to have both of you individually featured on the platform, which Tad will be doing an episode with you in January, but then to have you together, which I just love. I love when astrologers interact with each other. It's always so entertaining and so much fun. And I always learn a lot. So I'm happy that you're both here, and I'm happy that you all are here for this event today. And what I want to do is just start with, what's the theme of December? And I'll ask each of you individually, and I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. This time of year is always, there are elements that are always the same. And I always think that that's actually a very interesting theme to start with, which is that we're in the sign Sagittarius at the moment. And of course, what happens is that the sun is in Sagittarius from now up until the 21st of December, at which point the winter solstice happens, at which point I will actually be in Denmark in 57 degrees north latitude, where the sun rises at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon and the sun sets at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Wow.
So I think it's very interesting this time of the year because there's a Jupiterian time leading up to the solstice a few days before Christmas. And then, of course, there's a new moon in Capricorn happening on the 23rd, a couple of days before Christmas. So I think that's an interesting place to start because, especially as well, recently we've been experiencing a very strange situation of having Jupiter and Neptune, who are the two signs that rule Pisces, together. And so therefore they've both been incredibly active, and you can see their action all over the world in the sense that there's a lot of lying going on. There are a lot of strange things happening in foreign countries. Jupiter represents travel. There's a potential huge logjam coming up in December, although it looks as though Biden's attempting to kind of keep it at bay. Jupiter being travel, foreign countries, people's ideologies, and so on. And of course, we're even questioning the basic political dynamic of the US. So leading up to this time of the year when people likely pay out some money, feel very Jupiterian, like the sky's the limit. Go
Isn't it
for it.
weird? Isn't it weird, Ted, that we have this Jupiterian energy going into the holidays, which are maybe the most Jupiterian holidays of the year that occur in Saturn? And it's weird because Jupiter rules Sagittarius.
Yes.
And then Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius, and then
Yes.
Jupiter rules Pisces again. And the holiday that the Romans settled, that they celebrated in between the expansion going in and the expansion going out, was the Saturnalia, which is like right in the middle of all this heavy Saturn stuff. So it's very weird, this dance that we do with following tradition and marching. I'm not going to celebrate this year. I'm not. And eventually I do. It's like you can't resist that Capricorn drum beat. And at the same time, there's this optimism that somehow surrounds it. It's just a very, very weird juxtaposition. It's kind of like a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction every year.
Well, yeah, of course, because what happens is that people become very generous for a brief period of time, and then suddenly they get to feel guilty. So there's a kind of collective guilt once there's, in fact, the new moon this time happens like 2 days after the solstice. So you're going directly out of Jupiter, although the moon is actually in Jupiter when the solstice happens, which is a kind of ironic, this sort of connection between Jupiter and Saturn, which is archetypal, as Rick says, every 20 years. It's really quite perfect in a way because it really describes the drama of what's about to happen.
Well, and this particular new moon, I know we're jumping all around, but this particular new moon has 5 planets in Capricorn, and it's a bit reminiscent of the beginning of this crazy period of time when we had Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto and the Sun and Mercury and the moon all in Capricorn back in late December 2019 and January 2020. It's almost like this is the last stronghold of severe Capricorn energy before the energy begins to disperse.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it's like the dying gasp of the patriarchy, basically. Because
so is that your theme for December, for the month, the dying gasp of the patriarchy?
Well, that wasn't to be really the dynamic throughout the Sagittarian time, although I do believe we're approaching a new renaissance. I think a lot of people have gone underground, especially creative people I know all over the world, have really gone underground because of COVID and a whole series of travel restrictions, things of that sort. So I believe that something's about to emerge again, and that it will take the form of a new, very Sagittarian renaissance.
Wait, let me ask a question real quick. When you say a Sagittarian renaissance, what do you mean by that? What's the flavor of that?
Well, I have a history of trying to associate the signs of the zodiac to a process of history. And in my mind, the Renaissance itself was a Sagittarian time, going from around 1500 to the 1700s. So I associate planets in the sign Sagittarius with people that were around during the Renaissance and are therefore prone to have a very Renaissance way of seeing the world. So, and I believe that that's beginning to emerge in a way as though this Capricorn energy is creating a lot of seeds that are going to be. I've been taking a class here in Ithaca, New York, called Gayacono, which is the local Native American language that's part of the Iroquois Confederacy. And our teacher, who's brilliant, was talking yesterday in the class about the Native American cosmology and about the Earth and the planet. The Earth seen as a feminine dynamic, the mother. The planets are almost all seen as being very feminine. He was saying really that the wind is seen as like an uncle or something that comes to bring seeds above the ground and into play in the world and providing food and blah, blah, blah. So I do think something very strong is going on and people are about to emerge as the patriarchy has its like dying gasps in a way.
I think Tad nailed it, and I think the timing of it is such that the beginning of the ending really was the last gasp of the Saturn Uranus square last month. Election day kind of being in the United States, being around that turning point.
Yes.
And now that, Uranus and Saturn are 4 degrees apart, they'll be 7 degrees apart by the end of the month. That energy is ending, and that energy was intimately tied to the whole last couple of years. But the thing is, and I think Tad really nailed this, and December for me is either the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end. I'm not sure which.
Or both.
Or both. But I think the timing is that all the outer planets are either moving forward or going to move direct. We have Mars retrograde all month, and Mercury does a quick little retrograde dance at the end of the month and into January. By the end of January, everything is pushing direct. And on top of that, we have Jupiter in a new sign, Aries. And then by March, we'll have Saturn out of a Saturn-ruled sign for the first time in 5 years, in a Jupiter-ruled sign in Pisces. And then we have Pluto moving into Aquarius. And by mid-year, we have I think I jumped Saturn's gun. I think Saturn moves into Aquarius in May, and it's Jupiter. No, wait a minute. It's Saturn moving into Aquarius in May, and Jupiter's back in Aries, and something else changes signs there. What else changes signs?
Well, Saturn goes into Pisces, right?
Saturn, that's right. It's Jupiter moving into Aries.
Yeah, that's a while. That's a couple of months off. Yeah.
No, Jupiter moves into Aries the end of December.
Yes, correct.
All right. And then in March, what happens is that Pluto moves into Aquarius just for like a quick little taste. Mars moves finally out of Gemini, and Mars moves into Cancer, and Saturn. Yeah, Saturn does move into Pisces in March. Jupiter moves into Taurus in May. Point being that we have this thrust of energy of these slower moving outer planets all moving into new territory that irrevocably throws us into the future. It's like a growth spurt in time.
Absolutely. No, I think you're right about that. And hopefully things will begin to shift a little bit, because where we are right now is pretty dire, really. And I think, again, like having Uranus on the nodal axis at this particular point, there's a creativity and the individuality in the world. It's waiting to break out of being constrained. And that breaking out dynamic is wonderful.
Yeah, I can feel that too. I mean, even personally, I don't know if this is happening for all of you, but there is an urge to be more creative, and
Yes.
even in ways that I never have been.
Yeah.
So it is an interesting thing. So you're seeing a creative renaissance. You're seeing a real shift in the tides. Rick, you're also seeing a big shift in the tides. Let's bring it back to December in terms of all the things that people do in December, the holidays and
Right.
families and celebrations. Is the energy supportive of those types of events, or are we going to have, I mean, I know the last few years there's been a lot of tension around these events, but
yeah, Amanda, you and I talked a bit about that a little bit off camera, and this is really the first year as I look forward to the December, January period of time. There's obviously still some heavy events, but nothing like the last few years. And in some ways, it's almost like the cosmos is giving us permission to party, to forget about the heaviness just for a little bit.
I agree. Both charts, both the new moon and, the full moon on the 7th and the new moon on the 23rd are both bowl shapes, as they're called, meaning that all of the planets are concentrated in the signs from kind of Gemini, Capricorn through Gemini. And I happen to think that that's really covering ends and beginnings at the same time
Mm.
as we move through this time, meaning we're letting go of a whole dynamic that's been in operation for a long time, that's very being under the grip of the patriarchy, into some new territory that's emerging.
Mm.
And
And
Tad, what do you think about the full moon, which is on December 7, and actually the day before the Georgia election? And that full moon is conjoined with Mars,
oh, yes.
kind of giving it an interesting slant. That retrograde Mars in Gemini certainly was a culprit in the previous election.
Oh, yeah.
But here it is again, standing out on another election day.
Well, yeah, Mars conjunct the moon is going to create static and tension and competition. And, we see the political situation is really quite brutal at the moment. And of course, it's
That's an
really going to be a kind of
understatement.
fight, that Georgia election. And the whole dynamic of it, especially since, the sun in Sagittarius, the moon and Mars in Gemini are mutually square to that Jupiter-Neptune combination. Triggers the whole thing. There's a whole fantasy thing happening as well. That people are imagining that certain outcomes are possible that maybe aren't.
Mm.
So I really do.
People have been doing that though for several months, have they
And
not?
they have, of course. I mean, Neptune has been sitting on my midheaven for the last year, and I'm tired of it. And
Well, and you know what they say: as goes Tad, so goes the world.
Oh my gosh, they say that, huh?
Well, by the way, I also think of Rick. I think of you and I, Rick, as being very Sagittarius, although I have Sag rising, but I think of us both being quite Renaissance oriented in many ways also. I mean, in the sense that it's our time because we stray wide afield about things. We're interested in a lot more than just our astrology.
Yeah, that's very true. The fact that Mercury already squared Neptune back in November when Mercury was moving direct. Mercury squared, it does it on the very 1st of December. That was the first time. Then when Mercury turns retrograde, that Mercury squares Neptune again at the very end of the month on December 24th.
Right.
And on top of that, it will then square it a third time in January. Now, in addition to that, we also have Venus squaring Neptune on December 3rd, and we have the Sun squaring Neptune on December 14th. So we have this boom, boom, boom of this constant kind of in our face of whatever you thought was real isn't real. Or maybe it's people are trying to convince us that something that's not real is real, or we maybe inadvertently believing in something and trying to convince others that what we believe is real when it's not. I mean, it's Neptune. We don't know.
Well, I think one aspect of it is with also that Saturn in Aquarius, which is the sign that governs Russia. The whole war in Ukraine. I mean, at the basis of it is the fact that Putin sees himself as an incarnation of Peter the Great. The only problem is Putin's about 5 feet tall, and Peter the Great was 6 feet 8 inches tall and was a gigantic man. He was a great man in all kinds of ways. So I really do think that dynamic is also one manifestation of the end of this patriarchal way of being with things. And I really do believe that Neptunian quality creating the sense of not really believing anyone, no matter how truthful they may have appeared at some stage. I begin to wonder whether anyone tells the truth.
There's another aspect that is working through December that's actually a bit more subtle, but it's a slow-moving aspect, and it's with us for weeks. And that is the third hit of Jupiter forming a half square with Uranus.
Right.
Jupiter semi-squares or half squares to Uranus on December 23rd, and it did it for the first time back in mid-May, and the second time at the end of September. And I think here is a little bit more of what you were saying earlier about that Sagittarian, kind of Renaissance hopefulness, Uranus being the planet of genius. And when Jupiter and Uranus get together, it's like it doesn't matter what's been holding us back. We want to crash through. We want to break through. We want to find the ultimate solution. And that sounds all wrong, but
and
you
it's
know
very
what I mean.
lucky for that kind of energy also. I mean, it really puts a focus on individuals instead of collectives. And I think
Right.
that really represents a major shift in direction that's going to be coming about through this season, meaning that people are going to feel able to actually make some kind of difference in the way things are running. And
Well, yeah, Tad, I'm thinking with a lot of the disillusionment that of all the themes that we've been talking about with the, things around deception and lying and where's the truth and who's telling the truth. I think so many people have gotten to the point where it's like, wow, it just seems like there's lies everywhere. The only place I can put my true confidence and the only real place of power is within myself, because all this other stuff is, you think you can trust something or someone's, in a position of leadership and you find out all these things. So it's like, well, I guess if no one out there is trustworthy, I'm going to just keep it right here.
But there's something very important.
Speaking of which, women are coming into their own politically and in other ways. And I think, maybe you represent that at some level, but the
unfortunate thing is a lot of men think that women are coming into their own. And there's a lot of resistance. And I don't think we can just set the resistance aside. In fact, we can talk about the downfall of the patriarchy. We can talk about the revolution of ideas. The people who have money and who are in power are not going to let go easily. They never do.
No, they're not. The Elon Musk of the world.
There's a lot of them, and I see a lot of them on all sides, and it's exactly true that they're not. It's not going to give up without a fight. But that's, again, another reason why it's to focus on the things that you can control, the who you are, how you're showing up in the world, what you're doing in your corner of the world. I mean, that's what I've taken away from so much of this.
And that's what I think is happening in the American political system. And as you know, Amanda, I've been harping recently on this idea that the solar eclipse in Sagittarius in December 2020 previously had a similar quality eclipse in 1460, at which time women were being persecuted. Michelangelo and Leonardo were about to be born. The patriarchy was really pissing on women, basically, and demeaning them in all kinds of ways. The new translation of the Bible was created around that time. And I really do think that this echo of that period of time 500 years ago, actually 560 years ago, is really coming about again in a strange way. And that, it really, I can feel it with the class I'm taking even in here in Ithaca about the Gaia-Kono. He's basically saying everything comes from the mother. And
what's interesting, Tad, is that in the mid 15th century, in 1455, there was a Uranus-Pluto conjunction like there was in the 1960s, and it was followed very closely by a Uranus-Neptune conjunction in 1479, like the one in the 60s, was followed by the one in 1994. Those conjunctions happen regularly, but rarely do they happen so close together within a 30-year period of time. And in both cases, it's like we were fish underwater and someone jumped out of water and went, gulp, I can't breathe up here, but wow, there's a whole world, and they're back under. And it's like 2 times in one lifetime, we got a hunk of a portion of the generations to come up and see it again. And so it makes a very different imprint than if it only happened once and then again in 60 or 70 or 80 years. So there's a huge similarity between that Florentine Renaissance period of the mid 15th century and now. Huge.
Sure,
I
and all
totally
this
agree with
Jupiter,
that.
all the Jupiter Neptune stuff is like being underwater. You know,
Mm.
a friend of mine's a wonderful Irish filmmaker, and she and her daughter were deciding to write a screenplay, and they thought, well, we'll take a boat across the ocean, the Atlantic, and they ended up having to be on this freighter for 8 months last year because of COVID. They could not get off. And I
Mm.
said to her, you know, she said, well, the theme of my new film is very Neptunian. So therefore, it's about the idea that we are all underwater now and we're just about to emerge and take a
Mm.
breath of air and see, well, what's going on up here?
Mm.
So, Tad, what do you think happens? I mean, you opened up talking about, the Sagittarian into Capricorn energy and the winter or summer solstice if we're living beneath, in the southern hemisphere. But what happens during this month is that first Venus moves into Capricorn on
Right.
December 6th.
Right.
And then, I'm sorry, first Mercury moves into Capricorn on December
And then
6th.
Venus
And then
follows it.
Venus moves into Capricorn on December 9th. And then they're followed by the sun, as you said, on the 21st. But what might we feel as this? We feel this shift from this buoyant, optimistic Sagittarian energy, perhaps into a bit more methodical, practical Capricorn.
Yeah, well, Capricorn certainly has a lot of good things about it in the sense that it does represent the idea of something dynamic happening and a return to a very earthy way of looking at things. I really think there needs to be a similar kind of uprising around ecological issues, which I see vaguely happening, but I think it really needs to be embraced in a much deeper way because otherwise we're not going to have a planet to live on, basically. So I think again that's an aspect of this patriarchal dynamic. It's shifting it around, shifting it into a different direction altogether, and making the impetus back to Gaia, the mother, and
Yeah,
and
our friend Jeff Jower had the best bumper sticker ever. It said, "Good planets are hard to find."
I love Jeff. I always have and always will. And I remember so much the time running into you guys in Seattle, and I used to sit between them for their radio programs, which is it was like a kind of knockout, drag down fight most of the time. But it was also terrifically and enjoyable and energizing, all
Mm.
kinds of ways. Wonderful.
One of the things you're saying about bringing the attention back to the earth, I actually see people's rising interest in astrology as evidence of that, which might seem weird, but to me, it's this desire to cultivate a relationship with nature, with the universe,
Yes.
and of course, the earth is part of that. And more people are interested in it, and they're more interested in even having the type of relationship that you're probably learning about in your class, where everything is alive and you're actually in relationship with everything. So I think there's a lot of signs that your idea of this renaissance is actually happening. It's underway. And go ahead. Yeah.
Well, you and I are going to have a talk about this in a month or two, I think, and
Yes.
and there are all kinds of things going on around it that are actually incredibly interesting and important to know, particularly the dynamic that women being suppressed in that way and really beginning to come into their own in a way, as well as the feminine component of men, which of course is a similar kind of dynamic. When I'm in a college town, I moved to Ithaca, New York, where I went to Cornell Architecture School 60 years ago, believe it or not. And I'm looking around and I'm seeing all kinds of young women with tattoos of snakes and serpents and dragons on their
Mm,
arms.
mm,
And I'm thinking, the title of this book I'm working on is Awakening from the Serpent's Dream, that the snakes used to be symbols of the divine feminine, women's power,
yeah.
women's creativity and sexuality and the dynamic that creates. And I think
Mm,
that that's coming back. I see it. A lot of these women don't really understand, in quotes, what they really are doing.
Mhm.
but it's become a very popular movement in a way and fascinating. I love it.
Hmm. So, what do you all think? What do you two think about the
Having a
solstice?
southern moment, are we?
What?
Having a southern moment, y'all. What do y'all think?
I love that y'all term. It encompasses
It's
everything.
very personable.
Yes, it is. Okay, winter solstice. What's the energy like? And do you both think that the energy at the solstice then colors the next 3 months, 6 months? Does it have a ripple effect, or does it not work like that? Like the way
Well, it has a wonderful sesquiquadrate to Uranus, and to me that to have the lunation be so closely connected to one of the outer planets, especially the one that's about individuality, about independence, about new ideas emerging, and so on. It's not going to be an easy process by any step of the imagination, but I think the dynamic of it is really a very powerful one, especially because Uranus is still going to be within a couple of degrees of the node.
Yeah, yeah.
That nodal axis being incredibly important in Eastern astrology and being very much about family structures and the whole dynamics of things like that. I think all of these things, and of course the fact that both the lunation and Uranus are bothly connected once again with Neptune and Jupiter.
Right. That's what I was gonna say, is that this comes back around to what Tad opened with, and that is that the weird thing about this particular solstice chart, and yeah, I think that the solstices and even the cross quarters are all part of the structure of the year. And the lunations. I mean, this is what makes the fabric of the what is it? The warp and the weft, the cross ripples of the year. But what's interesting to me is that, and Tad mentioned this earlier, that at the moment that the sun ingresses or moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn, denoting the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, that the moon is still in Sagittarius.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well.
But also on the exact same day, or let me say within 24 hours of that, Jupiter moves from Pisces into Aries.
Yeah.
And so with Jupiter now moving forward again, it's moving rather slowly, only moves about 1.5 degrees for the entire month of December, but it picks up pace pretty quickly. And of course, moves all through all 30 degrees of Aries by May. But the point is that we have this practical, plodding Venus, Mercury,
Right.
Pluto, all in Capricorn.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
going to get to the top of the mountain. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to have a plan. And meanwhile, Jupiter comes crashing into Aries. And I'm wondering what you think, Tad, about Jupiter having been in its home sign and now moving into new territory. But I don't know about you, but I like Jupiter in Aries more than I even like it in its home sign of Pisces. But then again, I'm an Aries,
Well, I think you're right. And as you know, Rick, my moon is in early Aries at 6 degrees. And when I see my daughter in Copenhagen, around the 20th or 21st, her moon is at 1 degree Aries. So
yeah, and so
we're
is
going to
my
have a
daughter.
kind of
We've talked
party
about
around the
this.
solstice. It'll be dark, but we'll have a party nonetheless.
Yeah. We've actually talked about this, Tad. Both of our daughters have the moon at 1 degree of Aries.
Yes, I know. So they're both going to be thrilled that that's all happening, that the Jupiter vibe continues to really be kept up in the air in a way. And I love Jupiter and Aries also.
Yeah.
Tell us about Jupiter and Aries, and how long is Jupiter going to be in Aries?
Well, it's in each sign roughly for a year. But
But the bummer is the last 4 or 5 times that Jupiter has been in Aries, and I know this because I've tracked it, it has that same weird retrograde pattern as it does now. And that is, it touches into Aries, it backs up, and then it moves to Aries in 5 months. That's it. You can say that it's in every sign for a year, but because of its retrograde retrograde dance, it'll end up spending more time in Pisces and Taurus than it does in Aries, and it does that all the time. I always feel cheated.
Well, it's funny you say that because a good friend of mine, a good woman friend, astrologer of mine, and I began realizing we're both very Jupiterian. She has Sag moon, I have Sag rising, and we both realized that of course the Jupiter rulership gets too inflated. We have great expectations of things happening, and they don't. So we began calling Jupiter stupider as a kind of counteraction to that, so that it doesn't get out of control on a very positive way, and you really use it instead of like assuming everything in your life is going to be wonderful for a change.
Yeah, I think the problem with Jupiter and Aries is that we're saying yes before someone tells us the plan.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
we forget, that Jupiter and Aries. One of the key words that I like for Jupiter and Aries is enthusiasm.
Oh my
And the
God.
word enthusiasm comes from the Greek en theos, meaning with God.
Yeah, of
And you
course.
see, it's like when Amanda or Tad or Rick steps out of the way, and we're just wide-eyed and excited, and we're just going on, and man, we're enthusiastic. We're with God. And the
Exactly.
problem with Jupiter and Aries is that we're with God for the moment, but then we got to come back and be with Amanda or Rick or Tad, and it's not the same. So I
Well,
think Jupiter and Aries
I
is
think
exciting, but can get us into trouble. Sorry, Ted, go ahead.
my whole reincarnation timescale thing about Aries being the time in the historical process when humanity basically was nomadic and worshiped the cosmos. Because humanity in the early days, 50,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens were created, basically, the dynamic was that they were always moving because they were hunter gatherers. And so the only thing they could really worship was the earth in a way, but also the cosmos around them. And I think it's our time to worship the cosmos. And I think we come alive for that, basically, with that Aries vibe, which I love.
Yeah.
I think it's a terrific time of the year. And I know it does happen to run through very quickly, but then that's okay.
Well, I
Okay.
think the practice is to try to make something last rather than always pushing it. This is the Aries again in me speaking. Rather than pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, is to take a good idea and to try to let it just, to sit with it, not push it so hard so that I think it was, I think it was Plato who wrote that whenever there's great expansion, he wasn't talking Jupiter Saturn, but he said whenever there's great expansion, there has to be a following contraction to kind
Of
of bring
course.
it back in.
Of
And so
course.
I think that happens with Jupiter, but Jupiter is, when we are hopeful, when we have an opportunity, these are things where we see the potential to blow up a balloon and make it bigger. And even if it doesn't materialize, the act of reaching toward it put something in motion.
Yeah, well, that's why Saturn and Capricorn follow Sagittarius, because
Exactly.
it's a natural way of looking for a structure within that optimism to kind
Oh,
of
wow.
take things to the next stage. So we really want to make it last. We want to keep that wine cellar still going down there.
I love that visual too, is that expansion that happens, the dreams, the hopes, the ideals, the vision that you can catch. But then reality comes in with the Capricorn, and it's like, okay, well, let's make this real. Let's actually, and this is maybe how we continue to evolve and actually create new things on this planet.
I think so. I've written a fair number of books at this point, and one thing that I think is interesting, because I lived in Northern Europe for many, many years, is the whole idea that during the winter time is a time when I used to do all of the writing
Mm.
because I didn't want to go outside. I'm stuck inside for months at a time. It's cold, it's wet, it's dark, and the whole dynamic of it is about going into my inner world at that time and really beginning to revel in the whole inspiration that comes from the Aries dynamic and the Aries vibe.
Mm.
So I'm looking forward to that this time as well.
How about Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day? How's the energy around those holidays?
Well, of course, the new moon happens 2 days before Christmas in Capricorn. as well as the other three planets that Rick mentioned earlier. They are,
Semi-square Uranus is also on the 23rd.
that's
I
right.
see that
That's right.
there's also a Mercury sextile Neptune, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
back to the fantasy
Yes.
stuff, but it's not as conflictive there. I see that period of time this year as being rather tame compared to, let's say, the great conjunction a few years back of Jupiter Saturn, right around Christmas.
Yeah, well, when Mercury and Venus come together, I have a Mercury Venus conjunction in Virgo in the ninth house. But the whole dynamic of it, to me, I began realizing that the way Eberton sees Mercury Venus is that your mind is affected by your emotions very deeply. So when Mercury and Venus come together, the only ideas that you see as being relevant are the ones that have a strong emotional dynamic in a way.
It's actually held for the entire week because Mercury is stationary, and
Yeah, yeah.
Mercury is stationary while Venus catches up to it. Normally, Mercury moves faster than Venus, but
Right.
because Mercury is ahead of Venus, it slows down to turn retrograde. And on the day that it stops, apparently not really, as we know, on the day that it stops to turn retrograde, that's the day Venus catches up to it. And so we have, as Tad was talking about, this Mercury Venus conjunction that's the 27th, 28th, 29th, even onto the 30th, because those planets are just like hanging in the sky at the same point. The exact conjunction, however, is on the 29th.
Yeah, and I think also they probably are going to be trining Mars around that time as well. I mean,
Very, very
Mars
close.
in Gemini.
Yep, yep.
So
And
there's a
the
lot of
other
energy
thing, though,
behind it as well.
is that New Year's Eve is a very different flavor. I
Oh,
see
wow.
Christmas Eve as light and fun and let's celebrate. Let's lose some of the seriousness. Let's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
put some of the stuff aside. But as we get close to New Year's Eve, Venus is moving toward the last degrees of Capricorn, and in order for it to move into Aquarius, which it does on January 3rd, in order for it to get there, it has to go through the gates of Pluto,
Yeah, of
because
course it hits
Pluto is
Pluto.
basically
Yeah,
holding
absolutely.
court at the end of Capricorn.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny, the Danes, on New Year's Eve in Denmark, people put their Christmas trees out in the streets and set them on fire. So when you look out the window in Copenhagen, it looks as though the entire city's on fire, which is
Wow.
the Danes love that vibe, in a way. But it is a fascinating thing to
It
see,
must
and
be
I will
great
be.
for allergies.
It's so
Okay,
cold. Believe me, it's so cold. There's no
let
problem
me
with
ask
allergies.
you about Venus having to move through Pluto before it gets to Aquarius.
Yeah,
What's that
well,
going to?
Yeah, it's like I see this New Year's Eve as we're less interested in partying than we are in finding meaning. We're not going to be satisfied
I thought you were going to say in
in
finding sexuality.
well, and I don't think, though. I don't think just sex for play or sex for sensation
Oh,
is going to cut it the way it normally might for some people. I think that'll leave people feeling empty because Venus and Pluto together want meaning. They want intimacy, not sexuality.
yeah, for sure. They want the world to move.
Mm.
And so, I think that I think it's a much better night to spend in a small group with people that you know and or love than it is to go to the nightclub and to do the party scene like many people do.
Well, that's what I will be doing in Copenhagen. So actually, that's terrific. I really like
Wait,
it.
which one? You're going to be at the club or you're going to be at an intimate?
I'm going to be in a more intimate situation with great friends of mine in the days after Christmas. And
Nice.
especially an old friend of mine married a woman who was head of the Danish design school. He's a renowned designer from South Africa named Mervyn
Mm.
Kurlansky, who is a founder of Pentagram, which
Mm.
is an amazing design group. And he transported to Copenhagen around the same time I got married and moved there in 1990. And so we've remained great buddies. So I'm going to go see them and hang out with them over, around New Year's, and it should be fantastic. And
I'm gonna
I can't.
find a club.
We're gonna go to the club. All right, and then you both can report which one had a better New Year's Eve.
I'm not really. I do not have plans. But the other thing about New Year's Eve is that Mercury will have just turned retrograde, because Mercury turns retrograde on the 29th. And it does that at 24 degrees of Capricorn. We're going to be getting just that first wave of the first few days of that Mercury retrograde. And often the first couple of days of Mercury retrograde are the ones where we see the things that traditionally are associated with Mercury retrograde, because we're still running ahead and we don't want to listen to Mercury saying, slow down, absorb, build structure, don't push through it.
Well, also, I mean, Rick, as we know, Capricorn does govern fermentation.
Okay.
So it's a very good time to have some very nice wine. And
Uh-huh.
I'm already thinking about that, actually. And I wish we were together around that time to celebrate. But we've done that before a few times. And
never on New Year's Eve, though.
Never on New Year's Eve, however. And I think it's going to be a very interesting entree to a new world. What I usually do is I try to do tarot readings on New Year's Eve that go to the next year, a reading that has 12 cards around a circle. It's like a little zodiac, but also it starts with the ascendant. So it's a very interesting way of bringing the new year in, because it sets out a kind of pattern to see how you basically function and to give you some clues.
I like that. So in terms of the astrology of December, which dates are big dates for us to keep our eye on? And I don't know that we really nailed a theme yet, but we're getting there in terms of what is the actual theme for the month.
Well, I think the changes of sign and things like that, there's one happening relatively early around the 6th, 7th, and so on, which is when Mercury changes sign. And also, of course, there's one Jupiter changing sign into Aries. And I think that dynamic basically of the Jupiter shifting to Saturn is really the theme of this month coming up. And I think it'll be very interesting to watch it with that kind of idea in mind.
Yeah, and my take is slightly different. I feel like we're hot to trot. We're ready to go forward. And we are, and yet it's kind of like the story of Moses not being able to be allowed into the promised land. And I'm not saying that we're going to be in the promised land in 2023, but there's this sense that we have old business that we have to finish up, whether it be by the end of the year or whether it be by the time that Mars goes retrograde, I think around the 12th of January, or when Mercury goes retrograde later in January, or maybe even until March when the outer planets begin to change signs. Regardless, I think that we're still feeling the Mars retrograde and the Mercury the looming pending Mercury retrograde, and yet Jupiter moving into Aries, where we can see where we're going for the first time in a while, and we have the hope and we have the directionality. We just don't have the speed at which we can make that beeline toward the future quite yet. But I think we're encouraged. I think we're good to go. I think that this is the end of the beginning, and we're into whatever it is that is new.
I think that's great. And also the fact that the new moon is right around Christmas is wonderful to go outside, take a look at the stars. The whole dynamic being that shift into Capricorn is really something that we need to really do what we need to do at that time. And it may be an interesting time to kind of set things in motion for the new year that's going to come a week later.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that there is going to be greater clarity for people who have felt like they've been in a fog, or they've felt unsure or unclear, or not really knowing which direction they're going? Is there going to be more of a sense of clarity?
I think the Jupiter entering Aries will force that. That's really what Jupiter describes, really.
I
Mm.
think that's Jupiterian optimism.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
But of
no,
course, you think everything is Jupiterian optimism.
no, I don't. But I think that we can overinflate the meanings. I mean, look,
You mean
there
we
are
can
people
stupider
out there.
things, you mean?
Say it again.
We can use stupider, you mean?
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. Is that there are people that are out there that are stupid, that are ignorant by choice.
Yeah.
That because it's easier to maintain that ignorance instead of looking at what is real. And Jupiter moving into a sign is not necessarily going to cure these people.
No, I agree. And also I love going back to Europe. It feels to me like going back home somehow, and also somewhere where things are more straight up somehow.
Have you done your astrolocality for the different places that you love to go? I mean, because I just feel like we all have resonance with different places on the planet, and there's certain places you just love and they feel like home. And sometimes there's no logical explanation for it. You just love it.
Well, it's funny because when I moved to England in 1973. I was in England for 18, 19 years. And then I moved to Denmark in 2000 for 10 years.
Mm.
So I spent much of my life and the peak of my life. And I have a Saturn Pluto lines passing right through both Copenhagen and London.
Wow.
And so I began realizing in the beginning, this is really tragic, except I began realizing that it forced me to focus. It forced me to really press my creativity in a way and make something fruitful out of it. I needed to ferment myself in that way during this Capricornian time. So in a way, it was actually probably the best thing that ever happened to me.
I love that we've today pointed out that Jupiter isn't always just perfection, benevolence, all the good things, and that Saturn and Pluto aren't always all the bad things either.
No, not at all. I mean, and Capricorn is amazing when it comes to focusing and the kind of discipline that's necessary to create anything really creative.
Right. And you've done a lot of that in your life.
Absolutely. And I have to, I had to be tied down.
Right. I didn't say this in the beginning, but Tad is an author, a designer, an artist. He's written 18 books and is best known for his books and paintings on astrology, sacred architecture, sexuality, and gardens. So, I mean, man has written many books based on the concept of logarithmic timescale derived from the work of J.I. Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and Rodney Collin, and contributing to an application of astrology called lifetime astrology. So, clearly it's worked for you.
It does work for me. And, and also the fact that when I moved to the UK, I moved with my 7-month-old daughter who I raised on my own, and I will be seeing her in Copenhagen.
Wow.
And I really look forward to that because I haven't seen her for 8 months or so.
Oh, how nice.
But with her moon at 1 Aries, like Rick's daughter, it's always great to see her because she's a bundle of energy.
Tad's daughter's name is Ptolemy, and my daughter's name is Faith.
Oh my God, I love you guys. It's awesome.
So, we love you too, by the way.
So one thing I'd like to say is that when I was first falling deeply into astrology, the books that I was reading then was books by P.D. Ouspensky and Rodney Collin, A Theory of Celestial Influence, which I think I have right here. I do.
I have them right here.
Right there.
Oh, wow.
And in this book, there was one of the things that kind of changed my life. I actually have a bookmark on this page. You can see the little bent page, and there's the illustration right there.
I know it.
Of course you do, because when I met Tad, somehow that came up, And he was the only person in my life that I'd met who knew exactly what I was talking about, which now and in this book, there's also a photograph of what we call the long body of the solar system. Because normally we think of planets going around. Tad's going to bring an illustration that he did.
Nice. Oh, amazing. Oh,
Tad,
it's
the light is reflected in it. Move it a little bit vertically back and forth because we're getting the Tad, we're getting the reflection.
I know. I got that. Anyway.
Yeah, I think you'll be able to tilt it. You'll be able to tilt it there.
Yes. Yes.
So the thing is that I grew up. My dad was an electrical engineer whose expertise was coils. Coils and power supplies and antennas. That says a lot about me.
Yeah.
Now, my dad had equipment in his office where he worked that were machines that wound certain numbers of coils of wire at certain distances. And I grew up knowing about Nikola Tesla and these devices that would transform energy from one frequency to another. And when I saw this illustration, because we think of the planets going around the sun like this, but what we don't realize is that the sun is moving while the planets are going like this. The sun is moving like this at a not quite perpendicular angle, faster than the planets are going like this.
1 million miles a day, by
Mars doesn't go like this. It means that it moves like all the planets are spiraling. And if you speed it up, and the Tibetans and the most mystical traditions remind us that everything in the universe is instantaneous. We just see it as slowed down linearly. Absolutely. But if you speed it up, the sun becomes like a central filament in a step-down transformer where the different planets represent coils at different coherent frequencies. And Tad was the only person that in the first 5 minutes of meeting him, we had this discussion. It's like, wait a minute, you know about this shit too? And you can find 100 other astrologers. No one will know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Wow. I love it, Rick. Love you.
Oh my God. Okay, you guys. So as we go into December, if you were to give us all a nugget of astrological guidance for navigating the month ahead. So Rick just says yes.
No, I say yes to the nugget of wisdom, which is not my wisdom, but it's going to be my practice, but it's not often my practice.
Oh, good.
And that is to slow down and to not push toward finishing everything that you expected to finish this month or even last month, because we're going to want to power through and thrust ahead. And yet Mars is retrograde, even though Jupiter will be in Mars's sign Aries. It's like we got to take it step by step.
Okay. So slow down. Don't just thrust ahead. Take it step by step.
Paul Simon, slow down. You're moving too fast. Got to make the morning last.
Very good.
So I had open heart surgery 2 years ago. An aortal aneurysm, where I was very lucky to survive. However, what I began realizing is that I need to act more from my heart. So my recommendation for the new year is come from the heart in everything you do, and you can't go wrong. And that's a very Leo thing to say, of course, but also I believe it.
Yes, it feels Jupiterian too, in a way. Yeah,
it's very expansive, and
yes.
And I also have Jupiter and Leo as well. So
sometimes it feels stupidarian just to be from the heart, but it actually works.
Thanks, Rick.
Exactly. Oh, I love it. Okay. Well,
Amanda, thank you so much for this. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, what a party.
Yeah. It's a total party. And I love that everybody's here with us. And there's someone said, thank you for making me feel right at home. Here, someone was in New York and just said they felt right at home with the conversation. So thank you for making everyone feel like that. And thank you for being here, Tad. It's been so much fun. I don't think
Thank
we've
you.
ever had you on the podcast. We had you
No.
as an inner circle astrologer several
Right.
years ago,
Right.
but we will be having Tad back. So if you enjoyed this conversation with him and want to get to know him better, which he is fascinating. I got to sit on a couch at ESAR right next to Tad, and just he was talking to me about his book, and you alluded to it a little bit with the serpent and the divine feminine and all those amazing things that we will be talking about next time.
I look
But
forward to it.
it was so much fun to just sit there and listen to your stories and talk to you and get to know you. And then that you and Rick are such great friends. And this was actually Rick's idea. Rick was like, maybe
know.
Tad and I can do
I love
the
it.
December
you, Rick.
forecast together. I was like,
Actually, the story is that Amanda and I had this every other week schedule going for the Cosmic Connection, and a few weeks back, Amanda had a back issue, and she said, "Can we postpone, or do you?" I said, "Yeah, let's just skip it." And so we had one next week, which was put us off on our odd weeks. And she called me last week or 2 weeks ago and said, "Oh my God, I realized that we're having a Cosmic Connection, but I have a thing with Tad instead." And I said, "Oh, it's just Tad, cancel him." and she said, "Well, we were going to talk about something very, very, very specific." I said, "Actually, don't cancel him. Just reschedule that, and let's actually do this together, and that'll be a lot of fun."
That's
so
great.
it was.
So Amanda, the story about the wine is that a publisher of mine back in the day was a young guy who inherited an amazing wine cellar from his father. But he happened to live along the Avon River. And he was an asshole, basically. But the gist of it was that he really wasn't very generous in many ways.
Okay.
And it was very problematic to see. But what happened was that the house flooded one day, and he kept all of his wine in the basement, and every label washed off of the bottles that they originally had been on. And I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds
That
of
means
bottles.
you couldn't tell the 1723 Chateau Rothschild from
right.
the 2021 Thunderbird.
Yeah, and I spent some time with him trying to help him figure it out, which was a real treat.
Oh my gosh.
But the thing is, he'd have an amazing bottle of wine and not know really what it was.
Wow, that's incredible.
He had an idea, but it really wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't the real thing.
Fascinating how much that label matters on those wine bottles.
Absolutely. And
right?
also the water just it washed them off, and they were gone.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, thanks to you both for this very special December forecast. We're having lots of special events here at Astrology Hub as we go into the new year. On December 10th, we'll be having another party, and this party will be with 6 different astrologers, all looking at 2023. So we'll be looking at all the major transits of 2023, how to work with them, what they mean, what's going to be coming up. That's totally free. You can join us for that at astrologyhub.com/2023. We'd love to have you at that. And Tad, I feel like you were going to say something.
No, I just wanted to thank you, Amanda.
I'm going to say something really quickly. Constance says, "Nice job, Amanda, herding cats."
I get a lot of practice doing that. And these are lovely cats to herd. So it's been so much fun.
That's great. Love you guys and look forward to more.
Yes, same here. Same here. All right, everybody. And actually, Tad, do you want to tell them the name of your book just in case people want to get it before our talk?
It depends on which one. I mean, the most recent one is The Sacred Language of Trees.
Oh,
which I recommend for anyone who's interested in the feminine, because it basically talks about how most creative gods were actually goddesses.
Wow.
And so it's a very, because trees are feminine, and
yeah,
I love that whole dynamic, and I think you'll like the book. It's a good
Tad's
one.
written books on everything. He's written a book called Sacred Landscapes of the World.
Wow.
I've got to do something with my time, and I have to try to make a living. I mean, unlike Rick, I'm not a great hustler, and
all right,
I'm working on it. He's twisting my arm sometimes, and I'm going to get on Patreon soon, Rick.
Oh, good.
I
Yeah,
thought
do
you
that.
meant. I thought you meant the pool table.
I remember that.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. And thanks all of you for being here. Thank you for being a part of our community. And
Happy
thank you.
holidays to everyone.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy
And have a
holidays.
wonderful Christmas, New Year's, and let's have a wonderful 2023.
Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, solstice, everything.
Yes. All of it.
Absolutely.
All of it. Yes. Thank you so much. And Rick, thank you for this great idea. And everybody take care. And we will catch you on the next episode.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Do
Bye-bye.
not make any of your plans for 2023 until you've received the scoop on the astrological tides coming our way from some of the world's top astrologers. We're going to make that easy for you to do. On December 10th, we're hosting a free live panel event where we'll go through all the major astrology of next year. You're going to learn about the major transits, when they're happening, why they matter, how they may affect the world, and most importantly, how you can work with these transits most effectively in your relationships, with your money, your career, all of the major aspects of life. Don't get caught without your map for 2023. Get the gift of foresight at our live forecast event. Go to astrologyhub.com/2023 and join us now. And P.S., even if you can't make it live, make sure you sign up, because everybody who signs up will get the recording within 24 hours of the live event. That's astrologyhub.com/2023. Can't wait to see you there.